Welcome back to Switzer on Australia's Business Channel. We know that the Treasurer's small business component of the budget will be passed by Labor in the Senate. But the changes championed by the Social Services Minister, Scott Morrison, could be the sticking point that might undermine business and consumer confidence if talk of a budget impasse begins to dominate our headlines. So what does Scott Morrison have up his sleeve to win the Senate over? Or do we have to put up with the same rubbish from Canberra that endured last year and hurt the economy? Scott Morrison joins us from our Canberra studio. Welcome to the program, Mr. Morrison.
G'day, Peter. Good to be with you.
Now, I know you were taught economics very well because I taught you.
Well, you did.
At least
you did. Back in the 80s when you all had more hair.
Exactly right. And so you know how important consumer and business confidence is. So could your budget measures create a Senate impasse like last year and hurt the economy, particularly at a time when we don't need it?
Well, it's a very good question, and I think your previous guest was talking about this being a confidence budget, and I think that's very true, and I think that it has injected confidence into the economy, but you've got to follow through, and that means the measures. Now, this wouldn't be an issue at all, of course, if the Labor Party actually believed in savings measures in the budget, but they're going to play the same game as they did last year and basically try and create gridlock in the Senate. I don't think that's very constructive, but, you know, we've learned a lot of lessons from last year's budget when it comes to approaching the Senate. We've changed a number of important measures that they had issues with last year, whether it was on the pensions with the CPI indexation or a measure relating to youth access to the youth allowance in place of the dole, and we've reversed those measures. And we're also working constructively on the issue of family tax benefits. But in the social services portfolio alone, there are $7 billion, just over that, in savings in this budget, and of course we're pursuing savings from the last budget. And this is all important because unless you free up room in the social services budget, then you've got to accommodate, in 5 years from now, over almost $12 billion in spending on the NDIS. I mean, that's got to be paid for from somehow, and there's just over $5 billion of that which is not funded from the levy. So you've got to pay for childcare, Jobs for Families package, which has been very important. That's what these savings will do. And down the track, you've got to pay for the NDIS, and you've got to get on top of the budget problem.
So last year, it was pretty well believed that the economy would be stronger, and that's why you guys went harder on your deficit and debt reduction program. Given the fact that the economy is slower than we all want it to be, and even, as I say, one economist was even talking recession unnecessarily, but still, it's not the kind of language you want out there. And of course, the Sydney Morning Herald ran with it as a front page story. Are you in a position to negotiate with even the crossbenchers to make your reform to childcare get through? Have you had a chat to Jackie? Have you taken Ricky for a car drive, as Peter Costello recommended, to get on side with these guys and say, well, look, this is better than last year and we really need to get through for the sake of the growth of the economy?
Well, this is certainly the argument that we've been making, and we have been making it over a long period of time. There was particular measures that I took crossbenchers into my confidence over prior to the budget, particularly in relation to the pension changes, some $2.54 billion in savings that relate to the change to the assets test that we've discussed there, and that's something we started that process long ago with. But I also brought in external stakeholders like ACOS in particular, but CODA, the Council of the Ageing, and National Seniors, and that has been an important part, I think, of the process. But it is unfortunate that the crossbenchers get thrust into this position every time. I should also stress that on some of these measures, I now have had, over the last few weeks, some constructive discussions with the Greens, and Richard Di Natale, I think, is taking a far more pragmatic approach to his role than we've seen before from the Greens, and I welcome that. But that doesn't get us to an outcome yet. But I think the point you're making is the Senate has a responsibility, the Parliament has a responsibility, I think, to ensure confidence. The government has put forward, I think, pitched the budget right in the sweet spot for confidence and getting the balance between continuing to have strong savings measures to address the budget task while also reinforcing confidence by backing businesses' decisions, backing families' decisions and backing young people's decision to work.
Yep. Now, your childcare package is worth about $850 million, but really the new spending is about $327 million. But the fact that you've put this condition that the family tax benefit savings from last year's budget, which haven't been passed, have to go through, are you going to show any flexibility for the sake of the economy, Scott?
Well, the package you mentioned was the childcare safety net package. That's part of a much bigger Jobs for Families package, which is $3.5 billion. Now, that is the most significant investment in childcare this country's seen. And it, I think, underscores the importance we see in families being able to have the choice to go to work. Now, we know that just under 50% of families were saying to us, I want to work more, and that might be a day more, it might be 3 days more, it might be to go back to work altogether. And the reason they're not is because of the unaffordable costs of childcare. So that's why we're doing it. But, you know, we're not going to pay for that just by racking up the debt and the deficit. That's what the Labor Party did. And so we have a very clear nexus here between finding savings in the social services budget and deploying those savings to new areas such as childcare. So I'm working with the crossbenchers on the family tax benefit measures from last year. I think we are having some pretty constructive discussions on those. And it is about doing the work. It is about, you know, respecting what they're telling you and listening very carefully. But at the same time, the government has an objective here and we intend to meet it.
OK, you've got another interesting program is the subsidised nannies program. But some of the professional organisations say you've set the qualifications too low. What's your reaction to those organisations?
I'm going to let families decide. That's what I mean, I'm not going to go out there and create a closed shop around the pilot program for nannies. This is an in-home care family pilot where particularly shift workers, I mean the key criteria here is those who previously were unable to access the mainstream subsidies for childcare because of their hours of work, being a remote or rural area, a particular disability or condition of the child or something. They were missing out. Okay. And we want to make sure that there's a nanny program. Now, in some cases, I have no doubt that families will choose to want to have nannies who have higher levels of educational qualifications. And if they wish to do that, fine. But I'm not going to prescribe that decision for that family. And this is a pilot. This is not a mainstream application yet. And I would like to see a more flexible approach trialled in this way and really let families make the decision rather than governments and industry bodies and other academics and others start telling families what they have to do and not do when it comes to their own children. There was a staggering story in the Sydney Morning Herald of a family who said they were spending $170,000 a year on childcare. Yeah, how? And they kind of thought, well, the paper said it was a typical story. I don't believe that for one moment. But what is I don't think it's a typical story.
No, what is a typical family paying for childcare, Scott?
Well, look, it varies, but I mean, on average, you'll have a family using about 3 days a week, and it's not 1.5 child, obviously, but slightly more than one child, but towards the lower end who are involved. I mean, the fees that they're paying today, they've been going up pretty significantly over the last 10 years or so, but the most recent figures that came out for the June quarter of last year were showing that it was slightly less than previous years, which we welcome, but the rising costs have been a real problem. But the fees will range anywhere from about $110 a day on average up to, you know, far more than that, but particularly in rural and regional areas, those fees can be a lot less, around about $70 or $80 a day per child. So, I mean, they're the sort of costs people are facing, but the taxpayer foots 2/3 of the bill in the sector. Okay, so 2/3 of all the fees paid is paid by the taxpayer.
So what do you expect your nannies program to do to bring down, and where do you think the price will go under the program you're putting forward?
Well, the way the whole program, whether it's nannies or long day care, is structured, is you get a subsidy based on either what you pay or a benchmark price, whichever is the lower. So the benchmark price for the pilot program, which begins in January next year for a nanny, is $7 per child. So you might have, you know, 3 or 4 children with 2 families combining together, who one might be a police officer, the other one might be a nurse, from 2 different families working shift work or something like that. And so in that case, you would have anywhere up to a subsidy of $28 an hour for that service, but depending on how many children. What we're trying to do is make sure that we can actually get a level of childcare available to a group of working Australians who currently can't get access to it, and they're having to rely on, unreasonably in many cases, other family members or make other arrangements which really aren't satisfactory. And they work just as hard. In fact, many of them are key workers in our economy and our community, and they need that support.
Okay, Scott, well, I hope this time next year, I hope I can point to the economic growth scoreboard and said, that bloke I taught made it happen.
Well, we've all got our bit to do, and I appreciate the bit you've done.
All right, mate. Cheers. Thanks for coming on the show.
Cheers, Peter.
Coming up, we'll slice and dice today's Reserve Bank decision with an interest rate expert.